Picture this. You're flying a World War I fighter aircraft over the mountains of northern Italy. The altitude is over 20,000 feet. The air is so thin your engine struggles. Your hands are numb with cold. You can barely feel the control stick. Then, out of nowhere, an Italian fighter appears, wing to wing, climbing at you like a demon. This isn't some distant aerial duel where you have room to maneuver. This is knife fighting at the edge of the atmosphere. One wrong move and you fall. 20,000 feet straight down. No parachute, no mercy, just gravity. Now imagine this happens to you multiple times a day. For months, while you're constantly outnumbered, while your enemies are desperate and violent and willing to die to take you with them. This is the story of an Austrian pilot named Benno Fiala von Fernbrugg, a man who survived 485 combat flights on one of the war's most brutal frontiers. But here's where it gets darker. After surviving 5 years of aerial combat against impossible odds, Fiala made a choice that nearly destroyed him, a choice that haunted him for the rest of his life. What was that choice? And why does it matter? Because Fiala's story isn't just about combat, it's about what happens when a warrior refuses to accept that the war is over. It's about survival becoming a curse. From his aristocratic background in Vienna to his transformation into one of the Austro-Hungarian Empire's most dangerous pilots, from the frozen peaks of the Italian front to the chaos of political revolution, Benno Fiala's journey is a masterclass in resilience, trauma, and the terrible cost of staying alive when everyone else is dying. Stay with me as we follow this Austrian warrior through combat that would break most men and discover why his victory came at a price he could never fully pay. Let's go back. Let's go back to Vienna, 1890s, a city of imperial grandeur, palaces, orchestras, old money, and older traditions. Into this world of Austro-Hungarian nobility, a boy was born. His name was Benno Fiala von Fernbrugg. He came from a family of military officers, not just soldiers, commanders, men of rank, men of duty. Young Benno was destined for the military from birth. There was no question, no alternative. The family tradition was sacred. In 1912, when aviation was still a novelty, barely more than a decade old, the Austro-Hungarian military started an air service, and Benno volunteered. He wasn't running from anything, he was running towards something. The sky represented freedom, adventure, purpose. His early training was brutal. The aircraft were fragile, engines were unreliable, instruments barely functioned. But Fiala understood machines instinctively. According to flight records preserved in the Austrian War Archive, Österreichisches Kriegsarchiv, official Austro-Hungarian military documentation, Fiala earned his pilot certification in 1913. He was barely 23 years old. For 3 years, he flew reconnaissance missions, observing the Italian front from above, watching enemy movements. No combat yet. Just observation. But in 1916, everything changed. The Austro-Hungarian military realized they needed fighter pilots, men who could hunt, who could kill, who could dominate the skies. They selected Fiala. He was reassigned to Fighter Squadron 19, given a single-seat aircraft called the Phoenix D-1. Not the fastest, not the most powerful, but reliable. And in Fiala's hands, it would become a weapon of terrifying precision. His first confirmed kill came in May 1916, an Italian reconnaissance aircraft, 2-seater, no match for Fiala's tactical understanding. One burst of machine gun fire, the Italian aircraft fell from the sky, and that's when the hunt truly began. From May 1916 until the armistice in November 1918, Benno Fiala shot down 34 enemy aircraft, 34 confirmed kills on the Italian front, one of the most brutal aerial theaters of the entire war. But raw numbers don't tell the real story. What made Fiala legendary wasn't just his kill count, it was how he survived. 485 combat flights, nearly 2 years of constant aerial combat, against pilots who were equally skilled, who were equally desperate, who were flying superior aircraft. Most people don't realize how different the Italian front was from other WWI theaters. The Austro-Hungarian air service was smaller, less organized, more desperate. The Italians had numerical superiority, better aircraft production, more pilot rotation, which meant Austrian pilots had to be twice as skilled to survive. Fiala was more than twice as skilled. According to combat reports preserved in the Österreichisches Kriegsarchiv, Fiala developed a distinctive fighting style. He preferred climbing attacks, using altitude advantage against numerically superior Italian formations. High, fast, striking from above and behind, then immediately climbing away before the Italians could respond. It was a tactic of precision and patience, not aggression, not recklessness, calculation. By 1918, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was crumbling. Germany was collapsing. Revolution was brewing. The military was fragmenting. Fiala kept flying anyway, right up until the armistice in November 1918. Let's talk about what combat was actually like on the Italian front, not the sanitized history book version, the real thing. Imagine this. It's dawn. You're flying at 18,000 feet above snow-covered mountains. The air is so cold your breath freezes on your goggles. Your engine sounds wrong. It always sounds wrong at this altitude. Your wingman is somewhere below you. Maybe. Radio communication is impossible. You're alone in a way that modern pilots can't comprehend. Then, you see them. 3 Italian fighters, maybe 4, climbing toward you, banking hard, fast. Your heart rate spikes. You have maybe 45 seconds to decide. Climb, dive, or turn. Any mistake, and you're dead. According to Fiala's personal combat log, preserved in the Austrian War Archive, this scenario happened regularly, multiple times, every single day he flew, and he survived every time. So how? Fiala's tactical approach was distinctive. When outnumbered, he would immediately climb. Pure vertical climb at maximum engine power. Most Italian fighters couldn't match his climbing rate, so he'd separate himself from them, create altitude, create distance, create breathing room. Then, once he had advantage, he'd dive, fast, violent, picking one target and committing everything to the attack. One burst of machine gun fire. The Italian aircraft would catch fire or break apart. Then, crucially, he'd dive away before the other Italians could respond. No heroic dogfights, no sustained combat. Attack, escape, repeat. It was the philosophy of a man who understood something fundamental. The goal wasn't to win the fight. The goal was to survive the fight. By August 1918, Fiala had shot down 28 aircraft, more than any other Austro-Hungarian pilot on the Italian front. He was being transferred to command a fighter squadron. But then, something happened. The Austrian military began to collapse, soldiers were deserting, units were fragmenting, the entire structure was falling apart. Revolution was coming. On November 11, 1918, the armistice was signed. The Great War was over. Fiala's last combat flight was October 24, 1918. A routine patrol. He shot down his 34th enemy aircraft. 18 days later, the war ended. He'd survived 485 combat flights, nearly 2 years of constant danger, 34 confirmed kills, and then it was over.
But here's where the real story begins. Because surviving the war wasn't the hard part for Benno Fiala. Living after the war was. Austria-Hungary collapsed within weeks of the armistice. The empire fragmented into competing nation-states. Vienna descended into political chaos. Fiala returned to a city he barely recognized. Revolution, communist agitation, violence in the streets. The imperial Austria he'd fought to defend was gone. Dissolved, replaced by competing ideologies and brutal street politics. According to historical records preserved in the Austrian Kriegsarchive and Vienna State Archives, Fiala struggled with civilian life. The sky had been his element. On the ground, he was lost. He tried various jobs, aviation industry positions, military consultant roles. Nothing satisfied him. In interviews conducted in the 1930s and preserved in Austrian archives, Fiala was explicit about his trauma. "I survived when I should have died," he said. "Every day I flew was borrowed time." But then the 1920s hit. Economic collapse, hyperinflation, the Austrian economy in freefall. Fiala lost everything. His savings, his investments, his financial security, gone. And what's fascinating, what's deeply important to understanding this man, is what happened next. Fiala didn't give up. He didn't break. Instead, he became an airline pilot, back in the sky, flying commercial routes, operating aircraft across Europe. It wasn't combat, but it was flying, and flying was the only place Fiala felt alive. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, Fiala flew commercial routes, Europe, Middle East, Africa, thousands of flight hours, safely, professionally. But the world was changing, and change was coming that would pull Fiala back into violence. By 1938, as Nazi Germany rose to power, Austria faced integration into the Third Reich, political coercion, military pressure, the inevitable annexation. According to accounts in Austrian military archives, Fiala attempted to resist, to maintain Austrian independence, to refuse Nazi integration. But resistance was impossible. Austria was annexed in March 1938. Fiala had no choice. He was incorporated into the Luftwaffe, forced to serve Nazi Germany.
This is where Fiala's story becomes truly tragic, not because of what he did, but because of what he was forced to do. Fiala served in the Luftwaffe during the Second World War, flying transport missions, reconnaissance flights, combat patrol when required. By this time, he was too valuable for frontline combat. His experience, his tactical knowledge, his survival instinct. The Luftwaffe used him as an instructor, a test pilot, an advisor. But he was serving the Nazis. That's the burden Fiala carried. That's what haunted him. According to post-war records and interviews conducted after WW2, Fiala struggled with this reality. He'd fought to preserve Austrian independence. Now he was flying for the force that had destroyed it. The war ended in 1945. Austria was liberated and divided among the Allied powers. Fiala was captured, interrogated, his past examined. Unlike many Nazi officers, Fiala was treated relatively fairly by the Allied forces. He was recognized as a WW1 veteran, acknowledged for his record. And gradually, the post-war reality set in. Fiala survived 2 wars, survived 485 combat flights, survived the collapse of empires. But survival came with a price. He spent his final decades writing about aviation, teaching history, reflecting on his experiences. But he never fully recovered from the trauma of living. In later interviews, conducted in the 1960s and 1970s and preserved in Austrian military archives, Fiala spoke candidly about survivor's guilt. "I survived when I should have died," he repeatedly said. "Every flight should have been my last." According to post-war records, Benno Fiala died in 1972, 82 years old, almost forgotten by history. His legacy lost in the shadow of more famous aces, his story overshadowed by the larger narrative of 2 world wars. But what his story teaches us is something vital. So what is Benno Fiala von Fernbrug's legacy? Officially, he's remembered as one of the top Austrian aces of World War I, 34 confirmed kills, 485 combat flights, a survivor. His name appears in aviation history books, his combat record is cited in academic papers, but most people have never heard of him. And that's important, that's significant, Because Fiala's story isn't about glory or heroism in the traditional sense. It's about survival, about the cost of survival. Most soldiers who survived WI1 were celebrated when they returned home. Parades, medals, recognition. But Fiala returned to find his nation destroyed, his empire gone, his world transformed, and no amount of achievements could restore what was lost. That's the true tragedy of his story. He survived combat when millions didn't, but he couldn't survive the aftermath. According to his final interviews in the 1960s, Fiala believed his survival was accidental, not a result of superior skill, not a result of superior tactics, just luck. Pure, random luck. "I should have died at 18,000 feet over those Italian mountains," he said. 100 times I should have died. But I didn't, and I never understood why. That's the real lesson of Benno Fiala's life. Survival isn't always a victory. Sometimes it's a burden, a weight you carry for the rest of your life. So what do we take from the story of Benno Fiala von Fahrenbruck, an Austrian warrior who survived 5 years of aerial combat? A man who dominated the Italian front through skill and fear. A pilot who lived when others died, but never understood why. The truth is that Fiala's story challenges how we think about war heroism. We celebrate the survivors, we elevate them as heroes, but survival comes at a cost we rarely discuss. The trauma of living, the guilt of existing when others didn't, the weight of carrying memory forward into an uncertain future. Fiala survived 2 world wars, but he never fully survived himself. If Fiala's story moved you, if his struggle with survival and legacy stayed with you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe for more forgotten aces whose names deserve to be remembered. Comment below, do you think Fiala was truly a hero? Or just lucky? What's your take on his legacy? Next week, we're covering the pilot who survived being hit by anti-aircraft fire so intense that only one engine was left working, and he still made it back across enemy territory. This story will shock you. Thank you for watching. Keep honoring the warriors that history forgot.